Tonight, I can report to the world that the strikes were a spectacular military success. Iran's key nuclear enrichment facilities have been completely and totally obliterated.
Nuclear experts are absolutely terrified right now. Why? Because on June 22, 2025, the United States dropped 30,000-pound bunker buster bombs on Iran's nuclear facilities, and it might have completely backfired. Despite destroying buildings and infrastructure, Iran still has enough nuclear material for 9 to 10 nuclear weapons. And here's the terrifying part. Nobody knows where that material is right now. First Operation Midnight Hammer. Let me paint you a picture of what happened in the early hours of June 22nd. Picture this. B-2 Spirit stealth bombers. These are the most advanced aircraft America has, silently cutting through Iranian airspace. But they weren't carrying your typical bombs. No. These planes were loaded with 14 30,000-pound GBU-57AB bunker buster bombs. I mean, think about that for a second. 30,000 pounds. That's the weight of about 8 cars, concentrated into a single devastating weapon. And they didn't just drop these on random targets. They specifically targeted Iran's 3 most critical nuclear facilities: Fordow, Natanz, and Isfahan.
President Trump has just announced on social media that the U.S. has just completed 3 successful attacks on 3 nuclear sites in Iran.
The Fordow facility, it's buried inside a mountain. We're talking about one of the most secure nuclear sites on the planet, designed to withstand pretty much anything. But the U.S. wasn't taking any chances. They supplemented those bunker busters with a barrage of Tomahawk cruise missiles launched from submarines.
Now, the U.S. has these bunker busters you mentioned. They're technically called a massive ordnance penetrator.
U.S. officials were calling it a precision strike, designed to deliver what they described as a knockout blow to Iran's nuclear ambitions. Trump himself claimed they had achieved complete and total control of the skies over Iran. But here's where this story takes a terrifying turn that nobody saw coming. 2. Experts are terrified. Now, you'd think that after dropping the most powerful non-nuclear bombs in existence on Iran's nuclear facilities, the threat would be over, right? Well, that's exactly what makes this situation so bone-chilling. Because nuclear experts who've been analyzing satellite imagery are telling us something completely different. Jeffrey Lewis from the Middlebury Institute dropped this bombshell, and I quote, "As of today, that material is still present and its location remains uncertain." Are you getting chills yet? Because I sure am. We're talking about Iran's highly enriched uranium reserves, and they likely survived the strikes. David Albright from the Institute for Science and International Security confirmed what everyone feared. Substantial quantities of enriched uranium continue to exist. But wait, it gets worse. Satellite images show something that has experts losing their minds. Trucks were spotted sealing tunnel entrances at Fordow and Isfahan days before the attack. What does that mean? Iran saw this coming. They moved their most dangerous materials before the bombs even fell. Albright observed trucks seemingly transporting materials away, which means Iran was proactively safeguarding their uranium stockpiles. But there's something even more terrifying than the fact that Iran's nuclear materials survived, and that's what these weapons are capable of doing in the wrong hands. 3. The bunker destroyer. Let me tell you about the weapon that was supposed to solve this entire crisis, the GBU-57A/B massive ordnance penetrator. And when I tell you the specs on this thing, you're going to understand why everyone thought this would be game over for Iran's nuclear program. We're talking about a 30,000-pound precision-guided monster that's specifically engineered to destroy the deepest, most fortified bunkers on Earth. Boeing designed this beast with a dense, high-strength steel alloy casing and an ogive-shaped nose that can withstand the insane stresses of high-speed impact. When dropped from 50,000 feet, this thing reaches supersonic speeds and delivers kinetic energy that's honestly hard to comprehend. Here's what blew my mind. It can burrow through 200 feet of concrete or bedrock before its 5,300-pound explosive charge even detonates. The guidance system combines GPS and inertial navigation to strike within meters of the target. And get this, it has a smart fuse system that detects structural voids during penetration and times the explosion for maximum internal destruction. Only B-2 Spirit bombers can carry these weapons, and each bomber can carry 2 per mission. This technology was specifically developed to defeat facilities like Iran's Fordo plant, buried deep within a mountainside and protected by layers of rock and reinforced concrete. So with weapons this advanced, this precise, this devastatingly powerful, how could the mission possibly fail? Well, that's where this story becomes mind-boggling. 4. Iran's nuclear arsenal. Despite all those bunker busters, despite all that destruction, Iran still has enough nuclear material to build 9 to 10 nuclear weapons. Let that sink in for a moment. The International Atomic Energy Agency just confirmed that Iran possesses more than 400 kilograms of uranium enriched to 60% purity. And here's the kicker. If they decide to enrich it just a little bit more, to 90%, we're talking about weapons-grade material. I mean, we're talking about the difference between having a nuclear program and having nuclear weapons. But wait, it gets even more terrifying. Remember those trucks I mentioned earlier? Well, analysts now believe Iran moved this uranium to undisclosed locations before the strikes even happened. The exact location of this material, unknown to international inspectors. We're talking about enough fissile material for almost 10 nuclear bombs, and nobody knows where it is right now. And here's what's keeping nuclear experts awake at night. Iran's breakout time, which is the period needed to produce enough weapons-grade uranium for a bomb, is now considered to be almost zero if they choose to proceed. Zero. That means if Iran's leadership makes the decision tomorrow, they could theoretically have weapons-grade uranium within days. The only thing standing between Iran and actual nuclear weapons isn't the destroyed facilities. It's a political decision. But considering what happened next, that decision might already be made. 5th terror threat warning. Now, here's where this story takes a turn that honestly gave me chills when I first read about it. Because Iran didn't just sit there and take these strikes quietly. Oh no. They issued a threat so serious that it has completely changed the security landscape in America right now. According to US officials, Iran delivered a direct warning to President Trump that if he ordered strikes on their nuclear facilities, they would launch terror attacks inside the United States, not against American interests abroad, inside America. This threat was reportedly delivered directly to Trump at the G7 summit, where Iranian representatives indicated they could activate sleeper cells within American borders. I mean, think about what that means for a second. We're not talking about some distant military conflict anymore. Iran is threatening to bring this war to American soil. The Department of Homeland Security was so concerned that they issued an advisory warning of a heightened threat environment across the entire country. While they didn't cite specific imminent threats, the bulletin highlighted the likelihood of cyber attacks by pro-Iranian actors and warned that violence could escalate if Iranian leadership called for retaliatory action. And here's what's unsettling. US law enforcement has already disrupted several Iranian-backed plots since 2020. This isn't just about potential future threats either. Iran has a documented history of using regional proxies and sleeper cells. We're talking about militias in Iraq, Houthis in Yemen, and who knows what kind of network they might have established inside the United States. But Iran's threats weren't just directed at America. And what happened next shows just how quickly this situation spiraled completely out of control. 6. Israel strikes back. So here's what happened immediately after the US strikes that absolutely nobody saw coming. Israel, America's closest ally in this whole mess, completely shut down their airspace. I'm talking about all incoming and outgoing flights grounded. Why? Because Iranian missiles were already streaking toward Israeli territory. But Israel didn't just play defense. Oh no, they went on the offensive in a way that's honestly mind-blowing. Israeli jets launched some of the longest-range attacks in their history, striking Iranian military assets near Yazd city. We're talking about hitting the Imam Hussein strategic missile base, which housed Iran's long-range Khorramshahr ballistic missiles. Prime Minister Netanyahu welcomed the US involvement, calling it an essential step in preventing Iran from developing nuclear weapons. But here's what's telling. Israeli leaders emphasized that these weren't aggressive actions, but defensive ones. They're positioning this as protecting Israel's very existence. The Israeli government is now bracing for massive retaliation, not just against Israel, but against US interests throughout the Middle East. And honestly, after seeing Iran's response so far, I can understand why they're preparing for the worst. But what happened next is something that has world leaders terrified about where this is all heading. 7th, unconditional surrender demand. Okay, so after all these strikes, after all this chaos, President Trump decided to escalate things in a way that honestly left me speechless. He publicly demanded Iran's unconditional surrender. I mean, just think about those words for a second. Unconditional surrender. That's the kind of language you use when you're talking about ending a world war. Trump declared on social media that the United States had achieved complete and total control of the skies over Iran. But then he said something that made my blood run cold. He directly threatened Iran's supreme leader, calling Ayatollah Khamenei an easy target, but stating there were no immediate plans to kill him. This represents a massive shift from any previous diplomatic efforts. We're talking about moving from negotiation to open confrontation and military dominance. Trump's patience, in his own words, was wearing thin. But here's where it gets wild. Iran's supreme leader fired back immediately. Ayatollah Khamenei rejected Trump's surrender demand and declared that neither peace nor conflict could be imposed on Iran by outside powers. He warned that any US military intervention would have irreversible consequences for America. The standoff has reached a point where thousands of Iranians fled Tehran, fearing further escalation. But there's another world leader who issued a warning that has everyone talking about nuclear catastrophe. 8. Putin's nuclear warning. Now this is where things get insane, because Russia's Vladimir Putin just revealed he issued a direct warning to Trump before these attacks even happened. And when I tell you what Putin said, you're going to understand why nuclear experts are calling this the most dangerous moment in decades. Putin warned Trump that attacking Iran would bring the world millimeters away from nuclear catastrophe. Millimeters. Not miles, not meters. Millimeters. He said it would risk radically destabilizing the entire situation in the Middle East. Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov stated that Moscow had advised the US against direct involvement in the conflict, highlighting the grave consequences that could result. After the strikes, Russia condemned the operation as a violation of international law and warned that the world could descend into chaos. But here's what's terrifying. Putin has been holding consultations with Iranian officials, and there are reports that some countries are ready to directly supply Iran with nuclear warheads. I mean, we're talking about the possibility of Iran getting nuclear weapons handed to them by other nuclear powers. Russia's Deputy Security Council chair made veiled threats about nuclear escalation, and analysts believe these statements are designed to stoke Western fears about what could happen next. But the most shocking part of this entire story is how ordinary Americans are reacting when they find out what their government just did. 9. Americans say no. Here's what blew my mind when I saw the polling data. A clear majority of Americans are completely against what their government just did. We're talking about 60% of Americans believing the US military should not have gotten involved in this conflict. Only 16% supported the strikes, with 24% unsure. But here's what's really surprising. This opposition crosses party lines. We're talking about 65% of Democrats, 61% of independents, and even 53% of Republicans opposing US military action against Iran. I mean, even among people who view Iran's nuclear program as a major threat, most still prefer diplomatic solutions over bombing campaigns. The polling shows that 56% of Americans favor negotiations with Iran, and here's the kicker. Similar levels among both Democrats and Republicans support this approach. Economic sanctions are also more popular than military strikes, with many Americans preferring incentives like restoring diplomatic relations. There's growing anxiety that these strikes could trigger exactly what everyone fears: a broader regional war. Many Americans are remembering previous costly Middle Eastern interventions, and they're saying, not again. President Trump's decision to launch these attacks without congressional approval has raised serious alarm. But while Americans are protesting at home, something completely different was happening on the streets of Tehran that shows just how high the stakes are. 10th, Tehran streets erupt. So while Americans were opposing the strikes, the complete opposite was happening in Iran. The streets of Tehran erupted with massive protests, but not in the way you might think. These weren't protests against their government. They were massive demonstrations of defiance against America. Large crowds gathered at Enqilab Square, waving Iranian flags and chanting, "Down with the USA, down with Israel." What struck me most was how diverse these crowds were. We're talking about both government supporters and critics coming together in a rare moment of national unity against foreign aggression. President Masoud Pezeshkian was seen joining the demonstrations, which shows you just how significant this moment was for Iran. Protesters were holding placards, chanting slogans, and many vowed to remain in the streets even if missiles fall around me. That level of defiance and resolve is honestly incredible to witness. But here's what's really interesting. While many expressed outrage and called for a strong government response, others voiced frustration at Iran's perceived vulnerability. Some suggested that the regime's credibility had been undermined by their inability to prevent the strikes. Despite these criticisms, the overall mood was defiant, with many pledging support for their supreme leader and national sovereignty. The protests spread to other Iranian cities and even internationally. So there you have it, the most terrifying military operation that might have made everything worse. Iran still has nuclear material for almost 10 weapons, Russia's warning about nuclear catastrophe, and we're watching wedding parties film missiles like fireworks. The question isn't if this escalates further, it's how much worse it gets. What do you think happens next? Let me know in the comments, because honestly, I'm not sure anyone knows where this is heading. If this shocked you as much as it shocked me, smash that like button and subscribe for more coverage of these developing situations. Hit the bell because with how fast this is moving, you'll want to know immediately when something breaks. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.